Picture a quiet Tuesday morning just outside your back window. The cool, dew-heavy air clings to the grass, and the early sun casts long, fractured shadows across the patio stones. You walk out with a small scoop of mixed seeds, your fingers brushing the rough texture of the feed before you scatter it across the wooden tray. To you, it's just a clean, quiet act of charity. A gentle handshake extended to the wild world. A moment later, a flash of iridescent feathers drops from the canopy above. The bird lands with a soft thump on the cedar edge, its head snapping left and right in rapid, jerky arcs. It lowers its beak, scoops a seed, and swallows in a single motion. You smile, sip your coffee, and step back inside, weaving the scene to its peaceful morning rhythm. What you can't hear, though, is the high-frequency click of a biological switch being flipped in the trees above your house. Within minutes, that single visitor multiplies. Shadows dart across the grass with a strange, unnatural urgency. By tomorrow, that simple morning gesture won't be an act of support anymore. It will initiate a profound, irreversible rewiring of the local ecosystem, right outside your window, turning your quiet backyard into a silent arena of ecological dependence. Most people believe that feeding backyard birds is just a pure, unblemished good. We assume that tossing out sunflower seeds or hanging a suet block is like leaving a bowl of water on a hot sidewalk, just a straightforward lifeline with zero negative side effects. We think we're rescuing struggling creatures from concrete expansion and seasonal scarcity, bridging the gap between human comfort and wild survival. Yet, what most people don't realize is that nature doesn't actually operate on charity. It operates on equilibrium. When you anchor a localized, high-calorie, infinite food source 6 feet from your kitchen glass, you aren't just helping an animal eat. You are fundamentally dismantling the ancient algorithms of survival that keep a species sharp, resilient, and wild. In a pristine natural habitat, a bird's day is an exhausting calculation of energy expenditure versus caloric reward. They have to scour acres of forest to code the hidden patterns of insect life, dodge unseen predators, and compete within a brutal, balanced hierarchy. But when you provide a stationary, bottomless bowl of food right on your patio, you instantly collapse that vast evolutionary landscape into a tiny, effortless zone. Wait, what happens to an animal mind when the struggle for existence is quietly replaced by a human-controlled vending machine? The answer is a slow, invisible descent into biological amnesia, one that plays out in absolute secrecy right above your lawn while you're inside just washing your breakfast dishes. And honestly, this matters more than you can possibly imagine. Right now, millions of homeowners are participating in this quiet routine, completely unaware of the psychological erosion happening inside the tiny brains of their frequent visitors. The most unsettling part of this phenomenon is the illusion of thriving health. When you look out your window and see 20 birds clustering around your feeder, your brain interprets it as a thriving community. But beneath that picturesque surface, a silent transformation is taking root. You are inadvertently teaching wild animals to unlearn their own instincts, replacing the sharp edge of independence with a soft, vulnerable haze of total addiction. By the end of this journey, you will never look at your backyard feeder the same way again. You will understand the hidden architecture of wildlife behavior, the true cost of artificial abundance, and why your well-being morning routine carries a heavy, invisible price tag for the creatures you love. On day one of the observation, the rules of the local ecosystem seemed entirely normal. A handful of resident finches and chickadees claimed the tray. Their movements were cautious, erratic, and deeply attuned to the surrounding environment. They would land, grab a seed, and immediately dart back into the dense protective cover of the juniper hedge to crack it open in safety. This is the standard rhythm of wild survival. Cover equals safety, exposure equals death. But by day 7, something fundamentally shifted in the geometry of the yard. The birds stopped flying back to the juniper hedge. Why waste precious metabolic energy commuting to cover when the calorie source was inexhaustible and the human house was quiet? Instead, they began lingering right on the feeder tray, shoulder to shoulder, losing that sharp, hyper-vigilant edge that defines wildlife. The physical space around the feeder transformed into an avian highway. The air grew thick with the dry, papery rustle of wings beating against the crisp morning air, punctuated by sharp, territorial warning clicks. A dominant scrub jay arrived, and the smaller chickadees vanished not because they flew away, but because they had begun to surrender their natural foraging territories entirely. You watch this from your kitchen window and think it is just normal bird activity. You don't realize you have inadvertently created an artificial resource monopoly. In ecology, when you concentrate food, you concentrate power. The birds that figured out your feeding schedule first established a territorial mafia, dictating who eats, who waits, and who starves. By day 14, the psychological dependency began to manifest in their daily movements. Wild animals are naturally nomadic, shifting their foraging grounds daily to prevent overexploitation of local seed banks and insect populations. But our test subjects anchored themselves. They stopped exploring the neighboring woods. Their home ranges, which should span miles of complex forest, floor shrank down to a radius of a few hundred feet centered entirely on your patio. They were no longer wild foragers. They were residents of an artificial commune. The biological cost of this convenience is steep. When a bird relies entirely on high-fat, high-carbohydrate seeds provided by a human, its internal physiology begins to adapt to the surplus. Fat stores accumulate rapidly. Their liver and digestive tracts adjust to process a diet that is far richer and less diverse than what they would find scouring a natural forest floor or hunting elusive, fast-moving insects. More alarmingly, the problem-solving centers of their brains began to atrophy. In the wild, finding food requires spatial memory, pattern recognition, and mechanical dexterity peeling bark, cracking hard shells, digging through frozen soil. Around an infinite feeder, those complex cognitive loops are silenced. The bird no longer needs to solve problems, it only needs to wait for the glass door to click open. By day 21, the invisible boundaries of the backyard ecosystem began to bleed outward, revealing the terrifying fragility of what had been built. The dense concentration of distracted, easily accessible songbirds did not go unnoticed by the apex predators of the suburban fringe. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, the frantic, high-pitched alarm calls of a dozen goldfinches pierced the air, a sound so sharp and urgent it forces your head up from your desk. A shadow plummeted from the upper branches of the oak tree. A Cooper's hawk, moving with lethal calculated precision, clipped the edge of the feeder tray, missing a startled finch by a fraction of an inch before banking hard into the fence line. This is the hidden shadow of backyard feeding. You aren't just feeding. When a big scrub jay showed up, the smaller chickadees didn't just fly away. They actually started giving up their natural foraging zones entirely. You look out your kitchen window and just think, oh, it's normal bird stuff. But here's what most people don't realize. You've accidentally set up an artificial monopoly. In ecology, when you concentrate the food, you concentrate the power. The birds that figured out your schedule first basically formed a little territorial mafia, deciding who gets to eat, who has to wait, and who starves. By day 14, you could actually see that psychological dependency taking over their daily habits. Wild animals are supposed to be nomadic. They move around every single day so they don't overexhaust local seed banks or bug populations. But our test subjects, they just anchored themselves right there. They stopped exploring the woods around them. Their home ranges, which really should span miles of complex forest, shrink down to a tiny radius of just a few hundred feet, locked entirely onto your patio. They weren't wild foragers anymore. They were basically residents living in an artificial commune. And honestly, the biological cost of all that convenience is pretty steep. When a bird relies entirely on high-fat, high-carb seeds handed out by humans, its body starts adapting to the surplus. Fat stores pile up fast. Their liver and digestive system adjust to a diet that's way richer and a lot less diverse than anything they'd get by scouring a forest floor or hunting fast-moving insects. Even worse, the problem-solving parts of their brains started to atrophy. Think about it. In the wild, finding food takes spatial memory, pattern recognition, and actual physical dexterity. Peeling back bark, cracking hard shells, digging through frozen dirt. But around an infinite feeder, all those complex cognitive loops just go quiet. The bird doesn't need to solve anything anymore. It just waits for the glass door to click open. By day 21, the invisible boundaries of this backyard ecosystem started bleeding outward, revealing just how terrifyingly fragile the whole setup really was. A dense group of distracted, easy-to-reach songbirds doesn't stay hidden from the apex predators on the edge of the suburbs. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, the frantic, high-pitched alarm calls of a dozen goldfinches suddenly pierced the air. It's that sharp, urgent sound that instantly jerks your head up from your desk. A shadow plummeted right down from the upper branches of the oak tree. A Cooper's hawk, moving with lethal, calculated precision, clipped the edge of the feeder tray. It missed a startled finch by literal fractions of an inch before banking hard into the fence line. This is the hidden shadow of backyard feeding right here. You aren't just feeding songbirds. You're basically creating a localized predator magnet. When you concentrate prey animals into a predictable, stationary spot, your patio turns into an open-air hunting preserve. That hawk didn't just happen to fly through your yard by chance. It learned the schedule. It mapped out the vulnerability of the whole ecosystem you built. And honestly, what was happening to their actual survival skills was worse. When the hawk vanished back into the trees, the finches didn't scatter into deep forest cover like their ancestral instincts demanded. They just fluttered a few feet away onto the patio chairs, chirping nervously, waiting for the coast to clear so they could go right back to the exact same vulnerable spot. Their fear response was getting dulled by the overwhelming pull of that calorie fountain. By day 28, the experiment hit its peak. The birds stopped viewing the yard as nature. They saw it as a human-controlled vending machine. They lost their fear of us. They just sit on the patio furniture waiting for the morning door handle to turn. Their ancient survival instincts, the wariness, the scouting flights, the nomadic drive, had been systematically traded away for the guaranteed hit of a sunflower seed. And then, abruptly, it ended. On day 29, the feeder was empty. What happened next was a chilling window into the fragility of artificial dependence. Within hours, the morning silence of the yard was heavy and surreal. By noon, a frantic cloud of dozens of birds descended on the empty tray, scratching at the bare wood, pecking at imaginary dust, refusing to leave. They didn't scatter to find natural food sources. They had forgotten how. They just lingered in the freezing air, burning precious metabolic energy, staring at an empty plastic port that had failed them for the first time in a month. They had traded their wildness for our convenience. And as you stand at your kitchen window watching those frantic shadows linger over the empty patio, the realization hits you with the force of a physical blow. We think our interactions with nature are benign because our intentions are pure. We want to help. We want to connect. We want to see bright wings flashing against the dull gray of an urban morning. But here's the thing. Nature doesn't care about our intentions. It only responds to our interventions. The feeder in your yard isn't a bridge to the wild. It's an artificial fulcrum, tilting the balance of survival, rewriting the instincts of local wildlife, and binding them to a human schedule they can't possibly comprehend. When you pour seed onto that tray, you aren't just feeding a bird. You're pulling a thread in a vast, ancient ecological tapestry and just hoping the whole thing doesn't unravel. So, step back up to your back window tomorrow morning. Look at the trees, the lawn, the quiet spaces between the houses. Realize that every human action leaves an invisible footprint. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for the wild world is simply to step back, let them forage on their own terms, and leave nature to its own devices. Have you ever noticed how the wildlife around your home changes when you alter your outdoor habits? And what did it teach you about the delicate balance just outside your glass?